My name is Alana, and I was 32 years old on the February night my 8-year-old son came to the front door in his snow boots and his backpack, holding the blue blanket my great-aunt had knitted for him when he was still in the NICU, because my husband's younger sister had spent 7 months quietly teaching him that I was the reason he might have to leave. It was our anniversary. Reese had booked a table at a restaurant on Wyndham Street in Guelph, the kind with cloth napkins and a wine list we would never normally look at twice. 8 years together, and we had spent most of our anniversaries eating takeout sushi on the living room floor after Oliver was asleep. This year, Reese wanted a real night. He had made the reservation 6 weeks out. He ironed his shirt. Lavinia had offered to sit for us before we had even thought to ask. That was how she always did it, enthusiastically, ahead of the need, as if anticipating us was part of a job she had given herself. She showed up at 5:45 with a bag from Tim Hortons and a smile that I had never, in 7 years of knowing her, once thought to look underneath. The moment I need to tell you about is not the restaurant. It is the moment we were 3 minutes from our driveway and Reese's phone lit up on the console with a notification from the Google Home app. He read it at a red light. His face went still in a way I had only ever seen once before, when his father was in the hospital. And then he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, "She has Oliver dressed for outside. Call 911. To understand why those words hit the way they did, you have to understand Lavinia first. She was 27, 3 years younger than Reese, 4 younger than me. She was the kind of person children loved immediately and without condition. She got down on the floor with them, remembered the names of their stuffed animals, built elaborate blanket forts and left the mess behind without a second thought. Oliver had adored her since he was small enough to fit in the crook of her arm. I thought we were lucky to have her close. For a long time that was the sentence I used to talk myself out of everything my gut was quietly trying to tell me. Lavinia had been a registered early childhood educator before she took a job as an educational assistant at Oliver's school the previous September. She wore that credential the way some people wear a lanyard, always visible, always present. "I work with kids every single day," she would say, and then offer a gentle correction about Oliver's sleep schedule or his diet or how I had handled a particular meltdown. It was never unkind, it was always phrased as help. And when I tried to push back, Reese's mother Lorna would reach across the dinner table and pat my hand and say, in her warmest voice, "She is only trying to help, dear." I had been closing my mouth at that sentence for 6 years. It is remarkable how long a person can keep doing a thing before they understand it is slowly suffocating them. The smart home was Reese's project, the way the raised vegetable beds in the backyard were mine. He works in network infrastructure, and our house on Campbell Street was his showpiece, a Google Nest hub in the kitchen, a Nest Mini in the living room, one in Oliver's room, one in the upstairs hallway, all synced to Reese's account, all set to log voice-activated audio to the cloud. He had also set up activity notifications for the front door chime. That was what had lit up on his phone. There was one detail about the system that Lavinia would not have known, because she was not a person who read the fine print. The Nest Mini in the living room had a physical mute switch on the back. When the switch was engaged, a small amber light glowed on the front of the unit to let you know the microphone was active. Reese had flipped the switch in the fall because the light reflected in the TV screen and bothered him at night. The front of the unit went dark. Anyone glancing at it would assume it was simply off. It was not off. The switch only muted the speaker. The microphone was still listening, and whenever a voice entered that room above a certain volume, the unit logged the clip and synced it to the cloud. He had told me this once, in passing, over a year before any of this happened. I had filed it away without much thought. I think about it every day now. Lavinia had household access to our Google Home account. Rise had added her in September so she could manage the thermostat and the lights when she was sitting for us. She could see the device list. She could see that the living room Nest had no amber light. She could not access the audio archive, which was tied to Reese's personal login, and she could not turn off a microphone she did not know was running. For 7 months, she sat on our couch, believing that device was mute. It heard every word she said. What I missed partly because I was willing to miss it. I want to be honest about that. There were signs, and I cataloged them as something else because cataloging them honestly would have required me to name something I was not ready to name. There was an October afternoon when I came home from a 12-hour nursing shift and found Lavinia at our kitchen table with Oliver, the two of them bent over. Something she moved off the table the moment she heard my key in the door. Oliver looked up with a smile that arrived a beat too late. I told myself he was tired. There was a November evening when he asked me, while I was tucking him in, whether I ever got sick the way people on TV got sick. I asked him what he meant. He said never mind, in a way that was too deliberate for an 8-year-old. I kissed his forehead and went to finish the laundry. His teacher sent me a brief email that same month. Nothing alarming, just an observation, mentioning that Oliver had been drawing the same image over and over. A house with a heavy lock on the door and a woman standing outside it. Oliver had told his teacher the woman was his mum. I read the email twice, moved on with my week, and told myself children go through phases. And there was the notebook. A black composition book with a gold star sticker on the cover that I found shoved under his mattress in January while I was doing his laundry. I did not recognize it. I knew it had to have come from Lavinia. I put it on the mental list of things to ask about this weekend. And I put it there for 3 weekends in a row. And then it was February, and she was standing in our front hallway, telling us to go enjoy our night. She arrived early. That was the first thing. She had a tote bag that was heavier than one evening of babysitting called for. That was the second thing. And there was an energy to her, bright and efficient, steering us toward the garage before we had our coats fully on, as if the evening she had planned was running on a schedule only she knew about. Go, she said, laughing, her hands on both our shoulders. You two need this. Don't rush home on our account. While I was lacing my boots, I heard her crouch down near Oliver and murmur something I only half caught. Something like, remember what we said. I almost stopped and asked. Reese called my name from the car. I told myself it was an inside joke, some game they played. I walked out the door. 19 minutes later, at a red light 2 blocks from the restaurant, Reese glanced at his phone and then went completely still. The front door notification had triggered. On the small screen, Oliver standing on our front porch in his parka and snow boots, his backpack on both shoulders, the blue blanket under his arm. Lavinia was behind him, her coat on, the tote bag over her shoulder. Her car was at the curb with the back door open. Reese took one breath and said, "She is taking him somewhere. Call 911. I called Lavinia first. I do not entirely understand why I did that. Some last cowardly hope that there was an explanation I had not thought of. The phone rang once and went to voicemail. She had sent me to voicemail while I was watching her on a live feed standing on my front porch with my son. Reese made a U-turn in the middle of Wyndham Street and drove back fast and without a word. Her car was still at the curb when we turned onto Campbell. Oliver was at the top of the porch steps. Lavinia had one hand at his back and the other on the railing, and she was not moving toward the car anymore. She had seen our headlights. Reese got out and said very evenly, "Lavinia, step back from my son." I called 911 from the front walk. The dispatcher asked if the child was in immediate danger. I stood in the February cold and I could not answer her. That was the thing that frightened me most. Not the scene in front of me, but the fact that I could not quantify whether my own son was in danger from a woman I had let into my home 2 or 3 times a week for 7 months. I finally said, "She was babysitting. She's trying to put him in her car. She is my sister-in-law. Please just send someone." 2 officers arrived. They were thorough and patient, and Lavinia was extraordinary with them. She had an answer ready for everything, delivered with the calm, practiced fluency of a woman who had been rehearsing. She had cleared the sleepover with me last week. Oliver had been struggling at home lately, and she thought a change of scene would help. She said my name in a soft and worried voice that suggested I was something she had been quietly managing for quite some time. Reese spoke before I could. She was here to babysit in our house. She does not have our permission to take our son anywhere. There is no custody agreement, no parental arrangement, nothing in writing. I am telling you right now, she did not have permission to put him in that car. One of the officers wrote that down. The other told us, honestly and without cruelty, that since Oliver had not been removed from the property, and since Lavinia was family, their immediate intervention was limited. But he told us plainly to document everything we had, and to speak to a lawyer before Monday. He said those words specifically, before Monday. Lavinia left the tote bag on the porch. She walked to her car without looking at Reese. At the end of the driveway, she paused with her hand on the door, and she looked back at me. The expression on her face was not guilt. It was frustration. The particular frustration of a person who had planned something carefully and been interrupted close to the finish. We took Oliver inside. Reese made him hot chocolate and sat with him on the couch. I stood in the kitchen and made myself breathe until my hands were steady. My phone buzzed. A text from Lavinia, timed 14 minutes after she had driven away. "Hey, sorry for the mix-up tonight. We'd talked about this last week, remember?" Oliver was really excited. Reese looked at the timestamp. He set the phone down and said quietly, "She is building herself an alibi right now, tonight, while she drives home." He looked at the tote bag on the table. "Before we sleep," he said, "we open that." Oliver's clothes were folded with the precision you don't use for a single overnight. His toothbrush, his library book, a pair of shoes, the blue blanket, a prepaid phone in a yellow case that I had never seen. And at the bottom, the black composition notebook with the gold star sticker. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. It was titled in Lavinia's handwriting on the first page, "Oliver's Special Journal, just between us." What was inside it was not dramatic. That was the true horror of it. Dated entries from September in Lavinia's careful rounded script, each one a few sentences long. They had headings: times mommy was too tired, things mommy forgot, moments that made Oliver sad. Below each entry, space for Oliver to contribute in his own handwriting, and he had, in the tentative, uneven print of a child doing something he had been told was important. "Mommy forgot my lunch again, but I didn't say anything." She raised her voice when I spilled juice. I don't think she meant it. My teacher asked if things were okay at home. Small and ordinary and human. The kind of failures every parent alive commits on a bad Tuesday. Filed and titled and dated, page by page, over 5 months, some entries marked with small star stickers. Lavinia's notation for the ones she considered most useful. Near the back, in her handwriting again, "What to remember if mommy ever seems really sick or really sad, that's our sign. You call Auntie Lav right away. Remember, we practiced." And the last entry, in Oliver's handwriting, dated 5 days before our anniversary. "Auntie Lav says soon. She says I won't have to be scared anymore." Reese set the notebook down. He opened the Google Home app on his phone. Not the live feed, but the activity archive. The list of logged audio clips began on September 4th. There were 119 of them. He pressed play on the first one. Lavinia's voice came out of the phone speaker, warm, patient, and completely certain of itself. "You know you can tell me things you can't tell Mummy, right? Mummies get tired sometimes, sweetheart. That's why it's so important that we have our special talks." We stayed up until the sky went gray at the edges. The clips were not what I had imagined. I think I had expected something overtly sinister, raised voices, a clear threat, something that would make the wrongness immediately legible. What I got instead was my son's voice asking his aunt, in the dark of our living room, whether I still loved him. And Lavinia's voice pausing, a deliberate pause, the kind that takes a moment to choose its words, and then saying, "She loves you as much as she can, but I love you better." I had to leave the room. Reese listened to the rest alone. He has never told me everything that was on them. I have never asked him. I think that silence is one of the kindest things he has done for me across all of this. By morning, I understood that the danger was not one night. The danger was 119 conversations in my living room, in the room where I had believed my son was being read to. And the danger was the story Lavinia had been building around me in every direction she had pointed it. We found out about the school when Reese called the principal Monday morning. There was a note on Oliver's file. An EA had raised concerns about possible home instability in October and suggested staff maintain a gentle eye on his mood and statements. The note had Lavinia's name on it. She had used her title, her presence in that building, her professional badge to plant the same seed in Oliver's school file that she had been tending in that notebook for months. She had built a fence around me, out of other people's decency, so that when she finally walked out our door with my son, every person who might have helped us would already have been primed to see me as the problem. Reese secured the recordings before we did anything else. He downloaded the entire archive to an external drive, uploaded a second copy to a cloud account she had never touched, and then he removed her household access from the Google Home system entirely. 20 minutes later, the app sent us a notification. A household member attempted to remove a device from your account. She had tried to delete the archive the moment she lost access. She missed by 20 minutes. The recordings were already in 2 places she could not reach. We went to a family lawyer that Monday. I want to say this clearly because I know the question people ask. We did not skip the police. We went to the lawyer first. The lawyer reviewed the recordings and the notebook, and she called the police herself and arranged for us to give a formal statement with evidence already organized. A report was filed. The recordings were preserved. A cease and desist letter was sent to Lavinia that week, prohibiting all contact with Oliver, all discussion of our family with anyone, and all access to our property. Within 2 weeks, the school board opened an internal review of her conduct in her EA role. The hardest part of those weeks was waiting. I found a child therapist named Dr. Anwin Howell, who worked out of an office on Stone Road with beanbag chairs in the waiting room and a shelf full of old coloring books. She was patient and methodical, and never once handed me a verdict to wave around. What she told me, after several sessions with Oliver, was this: what he describes is consistent with a child who was slowly taught, by someone he trusted completely, to reinterpret his mother's normal behavior as something alarming. I can put my clinical observations in writing if that would help you. I told her it would. It did. Reese's mother Lorna called in the 3rd week. She said Lavinia had reached out to her. She said it might help everyone to sit down together. Reese told his mother we would come, but that the conversation would happen on our terms, not Lavinia's. I spent the day before that Sunday preparing practically rather than emotionally. Dr. Howell's written observations went into a folder. 3 of the clearest audio clips went onto my phone. I wrote down, word for word, what Lavinia had told our neighbor 2 houses down. A woman named Maureen, who had come to me the week before, mortified and apologetic, to tell me that Lavinia had asked her months ago to keep an eye on things at our house and let her know if she ever noticed anything worrying. Maureen had said yes the way any decent person would. She hadn't understood what she was agreeing to. At Lorna and Bruce's house on Sunday, the table was already set when we arrived. Lavinia was there. She spoke first. She was good. Real tears, real conviction, the warm and measured voice of a woman who believed every word she was saying. She talked about loving Oliver like her own, about worrying about me for over a year, about stepping in because someone had to, and about how that was what family was supposed to do. Lorna nodded through all of it. Bruce sat very still and watched his daughter. I waited until she finished. Then I took out my phone and pressed play. Her own voice filled the dining room. She loves you as much as she can, sweetheart. But I love you better. I let it run for 10 seconds, then I stopped it. I placed Dr. Howell's report in front of Lorna and Bruce. I put the cease and desist letter beside it, and then I said, I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to believe her. The room was quiet for a long time. Lorna had gone the color of paper. Bruce read through the therapist's report twice, his lips moving slightly over the careful clinical language. He set it down and looked at his daughter with an expression I had never seen on his face in 7 years of knowing him. Not anger exactly. Something older than anger and quieter. Lavinia tried to speak. She said the recording was out of context. She said we hadn't understood. And then, because 7 months of carefully managed composure has its limits, and because her audience had shifted, and because we had her own voice on audio that could not be reframed, she said what she had actually been thinking all along. I would have been better for that boy than she has ever been. I should have been the one raising him. She caught herself the instant the words were out. But they were out. Lorna stood up from the table and left the room. We heard the tap running in the kitchen, the reflexive motion of a person who does not know where to put their hands. Bruce sat with his daughter's words hanging in the air around him, and he did not walk them back or soften them. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Reese. He said, "You do whatever you need to do to protect your family. That is what I should have said months ago." The consequences were real, and they were permanent. Lavinia's cease and desist was not a suggestion she could choose to ignore. The school board investigation concluded in April with a decision not to renew her contract as an educational assistant, citing conduct incompatible with professional boundaries around students' families. The police file remained open and on record for any future context in which she sought work with children. I went to Oliver's school and sat across from his principal, with the timeline laid out on the desk. I asked that the note about home instability be corrected to reflect that it had come from a single source with a documented conflict of interest, and that the source was no longer permitted contact with our family. The file was updated that same afternoon. I walked next door and sat with Maureen at her kitchen table and told her everything, start to finish. She cried. She apologized. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She had been used by someone she trusted, and so had I. After that, she never looked at me with pity again. Oliver came back slowly. Not because of any single conversation or any one right thing I said, but incrementally, almost imperceptibly, a degree at a time. There was a March evening when he climbed into my lap at the kitchen table without saying anything, the way he used to when he was 4 or 5. He sat there for a while. Then he said quietly that Dr. Howell had told him that when a grown-up asks a kid to keep a secret that makes the kid feel scared, that is the grown-up being wrong, not the kid. Is that actually true? He asked. Completely, I said. He leaned his head against my shoulder, and I felt something in him release by a small, careful degree. Just a little. Just enough. A few weeks after that, he came downstairs on a Saturday morning and handed me a drawing with both hands, the way you hand over something you have been working on for a long time. It was our house on Campbell Street. The front door was standing open. Light in the windows. Stick figures in the doorway. All 4 of us, Oliver and his little sister Piper and Reese and me, and above the door, in his deliberate 8-year-old printing that pressed hard into the page. This is my house. I pick who comes in. I put it on the refrigerator, right where it could be, the first thing I saw every morning. Lorna calls most weeks now. Bruce came by one Saturday in April with a bag from Canadian Tire and fixed 3 things around the house that hadn't urgently needed fixing. He stayed for 3 hours and played Uno with Oliver on the living room floor. On his way out, he stopped me in the hallway and said, "I spent too many years letting the loudest voice in the room be the one I trusted most. I am sorry it cost your family what it did." He put his coat on and left without waiting for me to respond. I used to believe that loving someone and trusting them were the same thing. I believed that blood was its own credential, that a person who had been in your life for years had by definition earned the right to be in it. That belief was wrong, and I paid for it over 7 months of conversations in my own living room that I was not there to hear. What was done to my son was patient and quiet, and it called itself love. That is the part that is still the hardest to hold. It did not shout. It knelt down to his eye level, in the warm light of our living room, and poured itself into him gently and consistently, in the voice of someone he trusted completely. The microphone heard all of it. The switch was in the off position. The microphone was not. If you have ever been the one your family asked to keep the peace, to stop being dramatic, to let it go, I am asking you to hold on to that quiet, stubborn feeling your gut has been carrying. A feeling is not evidence on its own, but it is where you start. And starting is what I would give almost anything to have done 3 months earlier than I did. Subscribe if you would like to sit with more stories like this one, about the moments that ask everything of you, and about what it means to find your footing after someone else's deliberate, careful harm. 6 months after that February night, on a Friday evening in late August, the Google Home in the front hallway chimed with the door notification. For 1 full second, my entire body went cold in exactly the way it had in the car, at that red light. And then I heard Piper come running down the hallway in her socks, shrieking that Daddy was home. I heard the front door swing wide open. I heard Reese laughing on the other side of it, and Oliver calling from the top of the stairs to ask if we were having the good pasta. I stood at the kitchen counter and let the sound of my family fill the front hallway. The door was open, the lights were on, every person who came through it had earned the right to be there. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, it was more than enough.